this guy. Let's see what's going on.
So this guy is about to make millions of dollars by hyping up a product that doesn't exist. Now, like me, the guy's name is Ray, and Ray is 24, living in Miami, and bro really wants to be rich, and he's always cooking up some kind of new scheme to make that happen. Like he's stealing prescription drugs and selling them for a while. Then he and his friends borrow some money and they start a luxury car rental business. And that business does pretty well, but they're young and kind of dumb, and pretty quickly they blow through all their profits and their business fails. And that is when Ray is back to square one, and now he needs a new hustle to make money. And one day in 2017, one of Ray's friends, this guy, who we'll call Sorbet, gets a crazy idea. They want to create a debit card that lets you access your cryptocurrency. That way you can instantly buy stuff with your Bitcoin when you're like out at the store or something. And a debit card for crypto? Honestly, it's not a terrible idea. And so they're going to create a whole fake company and attach it to a cryptocurrency, like a shitcoin. However, Ray, Sorbet, and their other friend, this guy, Farkas, they have several problems with this plan. One, they know nothing about crypto, nothing about Bitcoin or anything about that space. And two, the very specific technology for a crypto debit card, it either doesn't exist or these guys just don't have access to it. Not in 2017. But whatever, these guys just want to be rich, and they're gonna do whatever it takes to make that happen. And so they come up with this whole ass scam. First, they set up a company called Centratech, completely fake and made up. They make a company website and they make themselves the employees. Here's actually a picture of the three of them all dressed up like they know what they're doing. Then, to make themselves appear more credible, they create fake LinkedIn profiles for themselves, claiming that they're all Harvard graduates. They even make up a fake CEO of this fake company. Like, they literally Google the words old white guy, and they find a random picture, and they post that picture of that guy as the CEO. And so all of this looks legit. And now, all they gotta do is promote it. So they all go into crypto message boards and chat rooms, and they start hyping up their fake company, hoping to get people to invest. Here's the thing though, some people do actually invest in this company. Not a ton, but it's something. But about a month or so in, suddenly, pow, their company gets a random endorsement from a somewhat known crypto guru. And overnight, kaboom, their company blows the up. And suddenly all kinds of people are investing. And they now have millions of dollars invested in their fake company based on a technology that they don't have. But now there's a real buzz around what they're claiming Centratech is going to do. So they just run with it. They get a legit office space so they don't have to work out of their bedrooms anymore. They hire like 50 other employees to come work for them. They get these fake Centra cards made to use as like promotional materials, like a proof of concept. They even hire celebrities to endorse this card. Like here's Floyd Mayweather endorsing it. They get DJ Khaled to promote it. And so this builds even more hype for their company and makes them look even more legit. Now, what are they going to do with all this hype for their company, considering their product is fake? They're going to try and raise even more investment money. And this is where they start selling CentraCoin, their coin, to the public. And so, bam, their coin goes live. And it's selling fast because they've been generating a lot of hype. And soon, Ray and his friends have raised tens of millions of dollars. And now, with all this new money, they got to start spending it. And so Ray is out here buying new tailored suits. He's at the mall shopping every day. He gets a new luxury car. He's always like carrying around tons of cash on himself for some reason. I guess just to like show it off. Meanwhile, the guys, they're all promising their investors like, yeah, don't worry, we're gonna get these crypto debit cards out by Christmas. But again, they don't have crypto debit cards because these guys don't have the technology. But they still don't seem to care. They keep spending money because I guess they don't think they're ever going to get caught. Until after all this hype these guys have been getting, a reporter for the New York Times starts paying attention to them. And so he's doing his research, and he finds some of their Instagram accounts. And I don't know what they were doing in all their Instagram photos, probably like partying or stunting in their new whip. But whatever it was, this causes this reporter to say, yeah, these guys definitely didn't go to Harvard. And he starts thinking maybe their company isn't legit. And so he wants to hear from the CEO of this company. But remember, the picture of the CEO on the website is just a random photo Ray and the guys found when they Googled old white guy. And so anyway, the reporter reaches out to Ray and the guys, and he's asking them all kinds of questions. And they're like bullshitting him, and he wants to speak to the CEO. And they're making up excuses, and they're like, he's busy. But with all...
Why don't this reporter just mind his own business, bruh?
All this sudden pushback, Ray and the guys know that eventually people are going to realize their CEO is made up. And then everyone will know their whole company is a fraud. And so they decide to kill off their fake CEO and pretend that he just died in a car crash. Like they put together a whole press release saying that Michael Edwards, our talented CEO, died in a car accident. And I guess that keeps the critics at bay for a while.
Hold on, he didn't have to say car accident because they want to go see proof. You just say he died of old age, to make it more believable.
But now the guys have a new problem. They gotta find a new fake CEO. And so they take a picture of Ray's grandpa and they put it up on the website and they're like, yeah, this guy is now our CEO. But immediately, some people start looking into it and they look at Ray's Facebook page and they find pictures of Ray and his grandpa. And they're like, the CEO of that company isn't a real CEO. They just used a picture of Ray's grandpa. But whatever, Ray and the guys still don't seem fazed because they just keep hustling. They get a bunch of their employees to start building a fake app that they can use in presentations like, hey, look, our product really works. And through that, they get even more people to invest in their company. I think they actually get 15 million more. But then, finally, it all starts to go south. Because that New York Times reporter, his article comes out about the company and kaboom, it blows the fuck up. And it brings up their old arrest records and run-ins with the law, and it just makes them look, not so good. And around this time is when the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, notifies the guys that their company, Centratech, is now officially under federal investigation. And I guess from here, the guys panic, because within a month, most of the company's employees are laid off. Also, the guys are fighting amongst one another, and they start draining all the money out of the company's bank accounts. But eventually, the law does catch up to them, and bam, Ray gets arrested. Here's his mugshot. And of course, the other guys, they get arrested too. And now Ray, he ends up pleading guilty, and he takes a plea deal, and he flips on the other two. And so Sorbet, he gets sentenced to 8 years in prison. And Farkas, he gets sentenced to 1 year in prison. While Ray, because he flipped on the others, he gets no prison time. That is wild.
He snitched on them.
So this little kid, he might be one of the best con artists I've ever seen. Let me show you. Now his name is Juan Carlos, and he lives in Colombia, and so far he's had a really hard life. But Juan Carlos is about to do whatever it takes to succeed. So one day he sets out to make that happen, and he heads to the local airport to catch a flight to Miami. But little Juan Carlos, he can't afford a plane ticket. So he sneaks onto the tarmac and he climbs onto a cargo plane, and he hides out in the wheel well. And he allegedly holds on real tight while the plane takes off and flies 3.5 hours from Cali, Colombia to Miami, Florida. Then the plane lands, and allegedly Juan Carlos falls out of the wheel well. And he just lays there on the tarmac, unconscious. And airport staff, they eventually find him. And he's shivering, and he's disoriented, and he's just a wreck. But he tells them, not that his name is Juan Carlos, but that his name is Guillermo. and that he's 13 and from Colombia, and that his parents had died, and that he doesn't have anyone else, so he fled to America. And his story just blows people away, because they feel sorry for him. And so the local media, they start covering it. Then a police officer in the area, this guy, Lozano, he's driving home one day, and he hears the story on the radio, that they found this 13-year-old kid who had been hiding in the wheel well of a plane. And Lozano is so moved, he goes and he volunteers to be Juan Carlos's temporary guardian, while the state figures out what to do with him. So Juan Carlos goes and he lives with Lozano and his family. And this changes his life. Suddenly, he's not living in poverty anymore. And this middle-class lifestyle feels like wealth to him. And they've got all these nice things, and so he tells himself that soon he's gonna have nice things too. And within a few weeks of living with Lozano's family, Juan Carlos starts stealing.
It's just been a week and you already start stealing, bro. Oh my god.
And things around the house go missing. Plus, he's been disappearing for days at a time. And Lozano and his wife, they start thinking that something isn't adding up about this kid. Then, one day, they get a call. And it's the Colombian consulate, who had just gotten some important information. Turns out, Juan Carlos isn't actually named Guillermo. He's named Juan Carlos. And he isn't some innocent kid. He's actually got a criminal record. And he isn't 13. He's actually 17. And his parents aren't dead. They're actually alive and well back in Colombia. And he probably didn't ride in the wheel well of that plane. It's more likely that he rode inside the plane with the cargo. And he just lied about it all because it made a better story. So Juan Carlos is just a little con artist, trying to con his way into the United States so that he can have a better life. And so, bam, they immediately detain him, and they deport him back to Colombia. Oh, but this isn't over for Juan Carlos, because for a moment, he got a taste of a much better life, and he'll do anything to get that back. So, over the years, Juan Carlos tries his best to scam his way out of Colombia, and get back into the US and other countries, using different aliases and fake IDs, but he ends up getting deported, like a bunch of different times. And while all this is going on, Juan Carlos, he's there developing the perfect con. Here's his perfect con.
Hey,
Juan Carlos dresses up
I respect the hustle. He never gives up.
real nice, pretending to be a rich man. And he goes into a 5-star hotel, and he tries to make it look like he's a guest there. He hangs out in the lobby and at the hotel bar. He'll chat with the staff a little bit just to make sure that they notice him. And as he's doing this, he also takes note of other guests. He'll memorize their name, he'll memorize their room number, then he'll go to reception, pretending to be that guest. And he'll say that he lost his room key. And reception, they'll recognize him like, oh, this guy, he's been hanging out in the lobby for a few days. Of course he's a guest here. So the hotel will let him in the room. And while he's there, he'll steal money and credit cards and jewelry and whatever he can get out of the guest's luggage. Then, to make it worse, he'll then call the hotel security desk and tell them he's locked out of his safe. And security, they'll come up to the room and they'll open the safe for him. And they don't question anything because he's already in the room. So of course they think it's his room. So then Juan Carlos takes everything from the safe and he leaves the hotel, a slightly richer man. And this con works. In fact, it works really well for him. So Juan Carlos does it repeatedly, hotel after hotel after hotel, just raking it in. Until one day in London, boom, he gets arrested for using a credit card he had stolen. But Juan Carlos, he's ready for this. He's been thinking about it a while, and he gives police a fake name and he skips bail and leaves town. And then a year later, he's back in London, pulling off his same con, and then bam, he gets arrested again for using another stolen credit card. This time, he gives them a different fake name and a fake ID. And he ends up getting off with a small fine because they don't realize he's the same guy they arrested the year before. So Juan Carlos continues with this pattern. He travels the world using fake names, fake IDs, and robbing hotels. But a few years later, he makes his way back to London again. And there, he hits 4 more hotels and leaves with over $100,000 worth of cash and jewelry. Now, at this point, a couple of London detectives have started to take notice. This detective, Swindells, and this other detective, Plowman. So Swindells and Plowman, they've started to piece a lot of this together, and they end up connecting a bunch of these robberies back to the thief, Juan Carlos. Meanwhile, old Juan Carlos, he's already fled. He's living the good life. He's got money, he's got clothes, he finally has nice things like he's always wanted. But it's just not enough. So Juan Carlos keeps going. And within a couple of years, he ends up in Las Vegas, where he pulls off his infamous scam and he ends up stealing $350,000 worth of cash and jewelry. And one of the hotel rooms he robs is allegedly Celine Dion's room. So that's fun. And then, about a year later, Juan Carlos is back in London again. And he hits up even more hotels. But then, one night, Swindells, he's out, and he's walking back from a bar he was just at. And he just happens to stop outside of a supermarket. And he sees a man leaving that supermarket. A man wearing a long leather jacket. And Swindells recognizes him. Because by sheer fucking coincidence, he just crossed paths with the Juan Carlos. Now, Swindells has never seen Juan Carlos in person, only in mugshots. But he's been working on this case a long time, and he knows it's him. So then, pow, Swindells arrests him, and he goes to trial, and he's sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Oh, but this story isn't over, because Juan Carlos really likes his nice things. So 3 months later, he's in prison, and he happens to have a dentist appointment. And he ends up charming the prison guards to let him go out to his dentist appointment alone. I guess this is some kind of like open prison where they're not as strict. And so they just let him go to the dentist alone. And of course, he flees. And from there, somehow, he makes his way to Dublin, where he steals a credit card and pulls his infamous scam in yet another hotel. And that is where he screws up, because that puts this Irish detective on the case. This guy, McGlynn. Now McGlynn, he goes and he looks at CCTV footage from some of the stores that Juan Carlos had used that stolen credit card at. And pretty quickly, he identifies the thief in the footage. He knows it's Juan Carlos, the same guy who had walked out of prison not too long before. So McGlynn investigates further, and he concludes that Juan Carlos must have just gotten to Dublin. So he's likely staying in a cheap hostel in the city where he can keep a low profile. So McGlynn spends 2 days searching all these hostels in Dublin. And then he finally finds Juan Carlos hiding out in a hostel with tons of items he had already stolen. And so kapow, he gets arrested again. Here's one of his mugshots. And he gets sentenced to 2 years in prison, but then an Irish judge rules that he can be extradited to France to face even more charges there, because he robbed a bunch of hotels there too. But then, while he's there in France, he's released temporarily, and then just like that, Juan Carlos disappears again. A few years later, he's busted by a customs agent at a gas station in Vermont after he had entered the US illegally. And he's sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. And after that, he gets out and he's arrested again in a hotel in Hong Kong. Then he's arrested in France again for robbing another hotel of over $200,000 worth of cash and jewelry. And from there, he's sentenced to prison again for 15 months. This dude is allergic to freedom. But now he's out, and his current whereabouts are actually unknown. But I'm just going to take a wild guess and say he's probably still out there robbing our hotel rooms. So shout out to Colombia, London, Miami, Dublin, Las Vegas, France, Hong Kong, and Vermont. This police officer is so bored with his job that on his lunch break, he's gonna go rob a bank and then return to work as if nothing happened. Now the guy, his name is Andre, and Andre is kind of a thrill seeker, and he's police captain at Kempton Park in South Africa, and unfortunately, he's not happy with his life, and he starts looking for a bigger thrill. And then one day, kaboom, he decides he's gonna rob a bank. So he catches an early flight from Johannesburg to Durban, and there he rents a car, drives to a bank in town, puts on a wig and fake beard, and he walks into the bank, and he points his pew-pew at the teller, and he asks the teller, "Will you please fill this bag with cash?" Then he takes the cash and he leaves, and he catches the next flight back to Johannesburg. And so boom, the robbery is a success, and it's a thrill for Andre. So he decides to rob another bank, and another bank, and another bank. And soon enough, every time he gets a day off from work, he flies to Durban and robs another bank. He
No
even
way.
starts robbing local banks in Johannesburg on his lunch break. Like, he'll
On a
rob a
lunch
bank
break?
and then later on that same day, he'll go back to the scene of the crime to investigate the robbery. Because he's the police. And he disguises himself so well, none of the witnesses ever recognize him. And he's really good at this bank robbery thing. He knows exactly how the bank security systems work, so he knows how to avoid getting caught every time. And this goes on for 3 years. Andre robs around 30 banks during this time, and this is a huge thrill for him. But then, one night, he screws up. So he's at this party one night, and he's getting a little tipsy. And he starts talking and having a conversation with his friend. This guy.
He self snitched on himself. Why would you? I would never.
Core. And Andre's bragging to Core that he's been robbing all these banks and that he's so good at it. Here's the thing about Core, though. Core just happens to work for the Bureau of State Security, which is kind of like the FBI. And Core feels like, because of his job, he just can't keep a secret like this. And eventually, he tells his supervisor. So the next time Andre flies back from Durban, having just robbed another bank, police are waiting for him at the baggage claim. And so, bam, they arrest him. And he's supposed to spend about 17 years in prison, but that's not gonna happen, because he's gonna bust himself out. Now, while Andre's in prison, he meets this guy, McCall. And he meets this other guy, Hale, both of whom are in prison for robbery. And pretty quickly, they all three become friends. And after about 3 years in prison, Andre and McCall and Hale, they come up with this wild plan to bust them all out. First, Andre and McCall, the two of them, they fake injuries so that the prison guards will escort them to an outside physiotherapist for treatment. And then once they're at the physiotherapist, bam, they overpower the guards. And they grab the guards' pew-pews and then they steal the physiotherapist's car and they use it as a getaway vehicle. And then once they've escaped, they lay low for a while. 3 months later, they go back to where Hale is, guns a-blazing, and they bust him out too. So now the three of them are together, on the run, hiding out. And so what does Andre want to do? He wants to start robbing banks again. He wants that thrill back. So then kaboom, the three of them hit up a bank. And then kaboom, they hit up another bank. And then kaboom, they hit up a third bank. And these guys just keep going, robbing bank after bank after bank. And they always wear ridiculous disguises. Sunglasses, fake mustaches, fake beards. They almost look comical. But despite that, they're a good team. They can execute a full bank robbery in under 5 minutes. Sometimes they're able to rob 4 banks in the same day without getting caught. So, because of all this success, soon enough, word starts to get out. And the local people, they start hearing about this gang of bank robbers on the news. And strangely, a lot of the public are cheering them on because they're making the police look like fools. And it's funny to them. So, Andre and McCall and Hale, they become like folk heroes. And people start calling them the Stander Gang, after Andre's last name. So this crime spree goes on for several months. The Stander Gang is hiding out at safe houses, hitting up banks when they can, collecting a lot of cash, and hanging out with lots and lots of escorts in their spare time. Now, before you start cheering these guys on too, just know that during this time on the run, Andre was known to approach random young women pretending to be a professional photographer. He would then lure them back to his hotel room, pretending he's going to take professional pictures of them, and then he would essay.
I don't understand. You're making money, and you're getting escorts, and you want to rape? Bruh.
Them. And at least 2 of these women end up reporting him to the police for this. And this will come up again later. So, eventually, the Stander Gang is named South Africa's Most Wanted. And their photos are suddenly everywhere. All over the media, everyone's talking about them. And the 3 guys know it's just a matter of time before they get caught. So they come up with a plan to flee the country. So first, they decide they're gonna buy a small yacht, and they're gonna leave the country that way. I guess it's supposed to be safer than all three of them flying commercial. So then Andre uses a fake passport, he flies to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and there he's gonna finish negotiations on the sale of this yacht. The next day, back in South Africa, police show up to one of the safe houses the gang had been hiding in. Apparently, police had been tipped off by some of the escorts the gang used to hang out with. So police are suddenly outside of the safe house, and it's 5 a.m., and McCall is the only one home. And police are like, "Stander gang, come out with your hands up!" And McCall, he's butt naked, because I guess he sleeps naked. And he gets his pew-pew, and he gets into a crazy butt-naked shootout with police. And they storm the place, and they're shooting at him, and he's running from room to room, shooting back. And then finally, once they have him cornered, he turns the pew-pew on himself, and he unalives himself. No. Meanwhile, there's Hale. As soon as Hale gets a tip that police are onto them, he bounces. He uses a fake passport and he hops on a flight to Greece. So he's long gone. While police, they raid all the gang's safe houses. And in one of those safe houses, they find photos of one of the women that Andre had SA'd a few months back. And this not only confirms her story about being SA'd, but it also confirms that this safe house belongs to him. And that safe house leads police to the yacht they bought. And that yacht leads them to a crew member they had hired to sail it. And that crew member tells them that Andre is supposed to deliver the yacht to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So now police know that Andre is in Florida. So then newspapers in Florida get word of this, and they start publishing Andre's picture in the paper. So now people in Florida are on high alert, looking for Andre. And so then, one morning, it all starts to fall apart for him. Because Andre is at a used car dealership, trying to get his car painted a different color because he had just stolen it. And there, the salesman recognizes him, because his pictures had just been in the local paper. And that salesman doesn't say anything then, but he later calls the police. So then later that night, police show up to Andre's apartment, and they surround it, because they're about to bust in. But Andre is actually not home. However, crazy enough, one of the officers just happens to spot him riding by on a bicycle. And the officer knows it's him, so he runs over and he confronts him. And so then Andre realizes what's going on, and he jumps off his bike and he makes a run for it. And then the officer chases after him and he catches up to him. And Andre stops and he pretends he's gonna give up, and then he grabs the officer's shotgun. And then thinking quickly, the officer pulls out his other pew-pew, and then bang, he shoots Andre 4 times, and he unalives him. Here's what Andre looked like in real life. So then that only leaves Hale. So Hale, he ultimately ends up in London. And there, he tries to commit another robbery, and he ultimately gets caught. And they throw him in prison for almost 20 years. Later, he does his time and he gets out. And he becomes a better person, and he starts public speaking. And he actually dedicates himself to educating people about the horrible consequences of living a life of crime.
The major regret actually is the fact that I've wasted talents and abilities and I have achieved nothing.
That's wild. Shout out to South Africa.
No way. Rappers who fell off. This is way too long.
This is Biggs, and Biggs is about to become famous for a really weird reason. Now, Biggs lives in England, and he's kind of a turd. He's been to prison a few times for like break-ins and stealing cars and stuff like that. But one day, he's out of prison, and he's living a clean life, and Biggs wants to buy a house for his wife and his 3 sons. Problem is, Biggs ain't got no money. He's broke. So he calls up an old friend of his, a guy who he met back in prison. This guy, Bruce. And he asks Bruce if he could maybe loan him some money. And Bruce is like, "Nah, bro, but I'm actually in the middle of organizing a train heist." And he offers to cut him in. And Biggs is like, "Alright." And so the plan is they're gonna rob a Royal Mail train, which is a train that picks up and delivers mail. Now, one of the cars on that train carries high-value cargo, which is just lots and lots of bags of cash. Now, Bruce has a guy on the inside feeding him information about the train schedule and cargo, so he knows exactly when and where to stop this Royal Mail train carrying all this cash. And along with Bruce and Biggs, there are 13 other guys involved in this heist, so 15 total. But we're just going to focus on Bruce and Biggs. So Bruce and Biggs and 13 other guys, they put on ski masks and gloves, and they are ready to go. And they don't have pew-pews because this is England. Instead, they just have some metal bars to beat people with. And so then the big day comes, and it's 3 a.m. And all the men go out to the train tracks and they hide. And when they hear the train approaching, a couple of them go to one of those track signals, it's kind of like a stoplight for trains, and they turn off a green track signal and they use batteries to turn on a red signal. And once the train approaches and it sees the red light, it starts to slow way down. And that's when, bam, all 15 men jump out from their hiding spot and they swarm the train and they get on board, and then pow, one of them hits the conductor with the bar, nearly knocking him out. And then some of the other men board the car with all the cash in it, and they force the train workers to lie down on the ground. And then eventually, when the train comes to a full stop, the 15 men, they start loading the bags of money into 2 Land Rovers they have parked nearby. Now, these guys steal 125 bags of cash, 2.6 million pounds, which today in US dollars would be worth about $35 million. So then they drive the Land Rovers over to this farmhouse in the country that some of them own so that they can hide out there and divide up the money. And over the next few days, they all take their cut of the money and they split and go their separate ways. Now, they have hired some people to come burn down the farmhouse after they leave to hide any evidence. But the people who they hired who were supposed to burn it down, they don't follow through with the plan for whatever reason. And then police end up finding the farmhouse and they get a bunch of the guy's fingerprints, and eventually, bam, Biggs gets arrested. Here's his mugshot. And also Bruce and 12 of the other guys get arrested too. So Biggs gets sentenced to 30 years in prison for this. But his story's not over. Because while he's in prison, he decides, this place isn't for me. And so he makes a rope ladder, and one day he uses it to climb over the prison wall, and he escapes. So now he's on the run, and he flees from England all the way to Paris. And in Paris, he gets some plastic surgery, and he assumes a new identity. Then he moves his wife and family from Paris all the way to Australia. And from there, he and his family stay on the run. And they move like 3 different times, and Biggs changes his identity every time. But unfortunately, it's not enough. Because one night, Biggs sees on the local evening news that law enforcement believes he's living and hiding out in the area. And so then Biggs just straight up ditches his wife and sons. And he gets on a passenger liner and he takes it from Melbourne all the way to Panama. And then from there, he flies to Brazil. And there, for about a year, he lives under the radar, working as a carpenter. Here's the thing about Brazil, though. At this time, Brazil has no extradition treaty with the United Kingdom, so Biggs can't get in trouble for his England crimes while he's living there. Lucky bastard. And at this point, he's been on the run for about 5 years. But he's having a great time in Brazil. He's partying every night, drinking at the clubs, and one night he meets an adult dancer at the club. And we'll just call her second wife, because she eventually becomes his second wife. And these two get married, and he gets her pregnant. Now, around this time, Scotland Yard shows up to Brazil, looking for Biggs. And they actually find him, and bam, they detain him. Here's his mugshot again. And so Scotland Yard tries to work with Brazilian police to deport Biggs back to England, but Brazilian police are like, nah, bro. A, because they don't have an extradition treaty with the United Kingdom, and B, because second wife is pregnant. And there's this whole other Brazilian law that says that you can't be extradited if you are a parent to a Brazilian child. So Biggs is free to go. However, his status as a known criminal means he's not allowed to work. So he's broke all over again. And everyone now knows he's an ex-con because his story has been all over the news. So then what does he do? He becomes a sort of local celebrity. and he starts charging local newspapers to do stories and interviews with him, and he becomes like sort of a tourist attraction. Like, he's the convict who successfully robbed a train and escaped from prison. And so naturally, people want to meet him and have him like sign autographs, and apparently he's selling mugs and t-shirts. So he starts making money this way. He even stars in a commercial for a Brazilian coffee company. Now, I couldn't find a copy of the commercial, but here's what he actually said in it. When you are on the run all the time, like me, you really appreciate a good cup of coffee. I'm not kidding. Those are his exact words. In fact, the dude is getting so famous that any celebrity that visits Rio de Janeiro during this time always has to stop and meet Biggs. Apparently, Rod Stewart stops by to meet him, and Sting stops by to meet him. The freaking Sex Pistols stop by and write a song with him, and they perform it and release it, and it becomes kind of a hit. But then shit gets crazy again, because one day he goes to a restaurant to meet a reporter for another interview. And while he's there, kapow! A couple of goons jump him, and they put him in a sack, and they put him on a boat, and they take him to Barbados. The kidnappers are, of course, hoping to get a reward from British police for capturing Biggs. But unfortunately for them, when their boat arrives in Barbados, Barbados is also like, sorry bro, we also don't have an extradition treaty with the United Kingdom. And so they send Biggs back to Brazil, where he once again is a free man. And so Biggs, he lives his life as an escaped criminal for about 2 more decades before ultimately his health starts to deteriorate. So then finally he gives up and he surrenders and he flies back to England to get the good health care he needs. And as soon as his plane lands in England, bam, he's sent back to prison to finish his sentence. But at least he gets good health care. And then about 8 years later, they let him out, and a few years after that, he passes away. Dude lived a crazy life.
And he got a lot of kids, dude. Well, it was a good stream, but I'm tired.